Well, thank you very much, Joe. I'm delighted to be here, and it really is I want to hand it to Andy Shepard for this having this today because this is really a timely topic. You know, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, they're kicking out 60 more of our diplomats from Moscow. They're getting on a bus here. So, you know, just when you think that things couldn't possibly get worse in relations with Russia, they do. And it just seems to get worse and worse. And as a former diplomat, I really think it's a mistake to have so few diplomats in each country because it really supports more miscalculation, miscommunication. And so diplomacy in this is extremely important. And Joe, contrary to rumors, I didn't actually fight in World War I. I know some people think, but I'm a commissioner on the World War I Centennial Commission. I was born here in Thomasville, and my wife doesn't like to hear me say that because she's a legitimate Thomasville native. I was born here, so I tell her that I'm a Thomasville native. She was born up in north in Nashville, and so she yells at me and says, "You're just a Yankee carpetbagger." You know, yeah. Well, anyways, this is I was kind of in the thick of all this topic of frozen conflicts and so forth, which we had in Ukraine while I was there. I was in Slovakia from 2010 to 2015. And that means that, and of course, Putin took Crimea in 2014. So there are a lot of issues that resulted here. You say, and the only way I can explain to people where I was, I say, well, I'm not the Melania Trump country, I'm the other country. So she was in Slovenia, I was in Slovakia. So here's Slovakia here to the west of Ukraine. And I show this map because the significance of the geography is that, and the issue specifically that I was dealing with was natural gas. So I want to talk a little bit about, you know, we're talking about different kinds of warfare. And I would argue that energy is being used as a tool of warfare by the Russians. And they use their domination of the energy markets to intimidate countries in the region, particularly in Eastern Europe. Now, if you look at the big picture, about a third of the natural gas in Europe comes from Russia. But if you go Eastern Europe, about 90% or more of their gas comes from Russia. So they're very highly dependent. They're a dominant factor. So Slovakia, the significance of Slovakia here is simply that the main pipeline going from Russia through Ukraine into Europe goes through Slovakia. You see they have a narrow border there. And that's where the largest volume of gas gets to Europe from Russia. And of course, Putin didn't like dealing with the Ukrainians, often for good reasons, by the way. The Ukrainians are no angels. But then he started this Nord Stream, a northern route pipeline, and they're trying to build a Nord Stream 2. And we're very concerned about that because that would leave Ukraine high and dry, which is what Putin's objective is. So one of the issues that I worked on was persuading. I knew that I was concerned that Russia would cut off natural gas to Ukraine at some point. And so I was lobbying the State Department actually to make a plan on this, to get gas back into Ukraine if they got cut off. And that was under, who was before Yanukovych? I can't remember. Anyways, there was a good guy who was head of Ukraine, and then the bad guy came in, and the guy who fled, there were huge riots, and he fled to Russia. And he actually, with Putin, did cut off gas into Ukraine. And so that had a huge impact on the country and on the region. And so I had been working with Slovakia to take gas that they have. The largest compressor station in Europe is near that black dot. See where it says Uzhhorod? That's the westernmost town in Ukraine. Right near there, across in the Slovak border, there's the biggest compressor station in Europe. Well, the Slovaks figured out a very clever way of taking that gas and building a loop where they could reverse flow Russian gas back into Ukraine. And so that was really a very successful operation. Ukraine got 90% of its gas from Slovakia, and it really felt good to take Russian gas and send it back into and play a game of chess with Vladimir Putin. But he was very unhappy about it. And Slovakia is an interesting country from the standpoint of Russian relations, because they're not necessarily anti-Russian. If you go, and it's true in a lot of these countries. We have to remember that the Russians liberated these countries during World War II, and so they'll never forget that. And the Russians lost millions, tens of millions of soldiers doing that. And also, there's some skepticism about the European Union in a lot of these countries. And if you go to a Catholic country and you're a member of the European Union, and they start talking about gay marriage and so forth, it doesn't sell well in these more traditional countries. So that's a real point of manipulation by the Russian. They send in propagandists to advocate against the European Union. Basically, the Russian game is to separate the United States from Europe, destroy the European Union. They're very active in the campaign on Brexit in the UK, which I think was a really bad mistake on the part of the UK. And I think it's a terrible trend in Europe. And I hope that countries don't continue to fall out of the European Union, because I think it's been a very successful project in building stability and prosperity in Europe. And there's been no war in Europe, in the European Union. There's been a war almost every generation since the medieval days. There's been no war because the European Union was formed, and we were behind that at the time. So some of the other, I'm really happy to see General Leonard here. He was the first commander of Guantanamo Bay, and I did a lot of work with Guantanamo Bay because Slovakia, I worked with them for a couple of years to try to get them to take some of our prisoners who had not been accused of any. 6 different law enforcement agencies looked at these people and said they're not guilty of any crime. And a lot of these people at Gitmo were just swept up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I really admire the work that General Leonard did as the first commander of Gitmo, because he wanted to make sure that we managed Gitmo in a way that was consistent with American values. And I think that's really important, because once we start mistreating people, then that gives rise to other countries treating our troops that way. So I really admire your work there. But I did get them to take 3 Uyghurs who are the Chinese minority. If they had gone back to China, they would have been killed. And but they wanted to leave Gitmo, so they settled in Slovakia. It'd be a difficult place to be plopped down in if you're a Uyghur. But anyways, and I also got them to take some more prisoners, and that was a very interesting issue to work on. I want to talk a little bit about how this is a really good topic for the gray zone, because Ukraine is the definition of a gray zone, right? I mean, Ukraine actually means borderland in Ukrainian. And if you're Vladimir Putin, or if you're most Russians, you look at Ukraine and you don't think it's an independent country, you think it's part of Russia. And the reason for that is very historic. Ukraine actually, Kiev is actually a more significant capital than Moscow. It was an earlier capital. That was where the Russian church started. Russian Orthodox Church began in Kiev. And so it is kind of the mother, Kievan Rus, what they call. was an earlier civilization than Moscow. Kiev is an older city. And so the Russians feel very territorial possessive about Ukraine. They just don't think it's legitimate as an independent country. And there's some historical support for both sides, but nobody has done more for Ukrainian feelings of nationalism and pride than Vladimir Putin. He attacked and took this Donbass area in the east, Luhansk and Donetsk, and of course he took Crimean Peninsula, which Khrushchev had folded into Ukraine when he was the prime minister of Russia, of the Soviet Union, or the head of the Soviet Union. And then Putin, it's a very important naval location. So Putin just took it because he didn't think that anybody would do anything about it. Now, so what do we do about all this? What's the solution to these gray zone issues? I think that one, I really believe that economic sanctions work. People say, well, they didn't work when Putin took Crimea. See, it didn't work because he took this area. I would argue that if we had not imposed serious economic sanctions against Russia, that Putin would have gone further. Because basically we would have been saying, gee, that's a terrible thing, but we're not going to do anything about it. And if you give that signal, then you're just going to encourage more aggression. But these frozen conflicts in Russia are nothing new. You have these other areas, which the thing is not working. I was just going to show just a couple of slides showing you a couple of frozen areas that are frozen conflicts around Russia that started back in 1991, 92. The two areas are, oh yeah, here we go. Moldova, there's Transnistria, that means across the Dniester River, Transnistria. That whole area was occupied by Russians. The Moldovans claim it as their own. And Moldova was a country created from the Soviet Republic of Moldova. It used to be the old Ottoman province of Moldavia. And they speak Romanian. And the red area is Transnistria, which is an independent country, but it's not recognized by very many other countries. It's recognized by Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Russia, and the other frozen conflict areas like South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And there's some South Pacific island, I can't remember the name of it, that recognizes this. And then I wondered, why in the world would the South Pacific island recognize Transnistria? And it turns out that they got $50 million of humanitarian aid from the Russians. So anyways, that worked. And that's true. That's basically true of all of these. Next slide. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Okay, I was going the wrong direction. See, this is the same thing happened with South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which is up in the northwest there. These were areas, this is mostly ethnic conflict. The Abkhazians didn't want, Georgia became independent in 1991, 89, 90, 91. Georgia became independent, and the Abkhazis didn't want to be part of Georgia. So they formed their own country, and the same with South Ossetia. And then after a while, so again, they're recognized by very few countries, Venezuela, Nicaragua. And then you remember when the Russians invaded Georgia in 2008, in 2008. They were able to take over that militarily, both those countries militarily, and consolidate their hold on it. And so the Russians basically control those areas. So this is the very definition of a frozen conflict. And so what's next? You know, where will we go next? And so we come to the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And the problem is that the good news is these are all NATO countries, and they're spending a lot of money on their defense. The bad news is they have large Russian populations. And so the kind of warfare that you would see in these Baltic countries would be the kind that you've seen in Ukraine and these other areas where the Russians would stand back and they'd use the Russian population in the country to defend their rights as citizens and so forth. And they would do all the fighting with Russian tacit support, just like they did in Ukraine. And so when NATO would be called to defend them, they would just say, well, this is an internal conflict. We Russians don't have anything to do with it. And so that's the kind of hybrid warfare that we're concerned about in places like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I mean, the mayor of Riga, for example, is Russian. Not that he's a bad guy, but the populations of the Russian populations in these countries is very significant. So that's what we have to watch for. So I think that, you know, as far as the big picture solution to all this, I think that, you know, I gave a talk yesterday to the Rotary about World War I. And World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars, right? That's what it was called. And of course, we only wish that were going to be the case. But part of the reason that World War I led to World War II is that I believe that we in the United States and in Europe did everything wrong after World War I. We assessed too punitive damages on Germany. We went isolationist. We let our military go down. We did not join the League of Nations. And so all the pillars for stability were not created. And in my opinion, after World War II, we did everything right. We had the Marshall Plan, get Europe on its feet. We established NATO, security alliance. It's the greatest alliance in the history of the world, military alliance. We supported the idea of the European Union after World War II. And the whole idea of the European Union was to avoid conflict. And it's been successful since 1945, which I think is extraordinary. The only wars that have taken place in that part of the world are in the Balkans, which is outside the European Union. But if we eventually get a Europe whole, free, and at peace, we wouldn't have these wars, even in the Balkans. So I think the European Union has been, they're certainly not perfect. There's a lot of over-regulation and all that, but as a big project has been extremely successful, in my opinion. And particularly in these parts of Eastern Europe, you know, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, and there's a real problem there because those countries are very attacking the European Union. At the same time, they're getting tens of billions of dollars of benefits from the European Union. So they're kind of biting the hands that's feeding them. So anyways, I want to leave plenty of time for questions. The thing that strikes me also when you talk about these frozen conflicts and these hybrid warfare, the language that Vladimir Putin uses to justify going into these places, it's very risky and dangerous to start invoking Hitler. But the language that Putin uses is strikingly similar, almost identical to the language that Hitler used to take over the Sudetenland. And it's the same, and by the way, the Germans did have some legitimate gripes there, just as these people do in all these frozen conflict areas. There are legitimate, we have to recognize that there are legitimate issues that they have. But the language that they use, we're going to protect all Russians wherever they live and defend their rights to their own country, whatever. So it's a scary time that we're in, and I think that we're at a moment in history where I mentioned all the pillars of stability and peace in Europe. A lot of those pillars are now under attack. The European Union is under attack. NATO needs to, those countries, the Baltic countries are doing a good job. They're up close to 2% of GDP on defense. We need to get all the rest of these countries up to 2%. The Germans, the Brits are pretty good. The French could do more. A lot of these countries, Poland is doing very well. But there are a lot of European countries that are not pulling their own weight, and we shouldn't spend our taxpayer dollars to pay for their security. We should be a partner of theirs, but we shouldn't, we shouldn't go overboard. Let them go overboard. So I think that's. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. So why don't we go with questions now? Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
You speak about the security provided by the European Union. What additional security?
Well, by NATO.
But you talk about EU.
Yeah.
What does the EU provide for European security beyond what NATO provides?
Well, you're right that you make a good point. I think that NATO is the primary engine of European security. But I think the concern is that if you have these countries splintered apart, that there's less cohesion and less need to work with each other and to open borders, trade, and so forth. I think it's been a lot of people disagree, but I think it's been a very, by and large, positive experiment. But you're right, they're not the primary deliverer of security, NATO is. But I think the political cohesion that is brought about has created more stability.
There is a European corps under their command and division, apart from NATO. I'm not sure it's fully manned, but there is a European corps theoretically in existence. Ukraine has no petroleum. I thought they had some.
They have some, but and they're trying to tap it, but most of it comes from Russia. And Ukraine is, they have a lot of problems in this area. They're very, very corrupt. They steal the revenue from the natural gas. So actually, Putin had some justification, we have to admit. He has some justification for cutting off the gas to Ukraine. And it's a very poorly managed country from an energy efficiency point of view. You have these huge buildings, and they just the gas just on a warm day they just have no incentives to keep down their heating and cooling and air conditioning and so forth. And it's just very poorly managed in that regard. But they do have some reserves here and there, and we're working with them. That's the United States is working with them with some companies to try to get more of that. But yes, sir.
Thank you. The counterproductive at, let's say, taken out. The United States wasn't alone. 20-odd other countries.
To
retaliate for the Russian murder of a former.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that we should have taken that step. I don't disagree. I agree that we should have taken that step. I'm only commenting that it is, risky to diminish our diplomacy, but it is what it is, right? And I think that you're right. The Europeans took the lead on it. We were a little slow recognizing what happened with the poison. And that incident with the poison has really had the effect that Putin didn't really anticipate of bringing together all the European Union. And this is, again, where the EU, they have these policy councils. They can get together and respond as a continent to Russia. And one of the issues I was working on was economic sanctions, because the State Department was calling me all the time saying, well, because the Prime Minister of Slovakia he was playing footsie with Putin, and he liked to be friends with everybody, the United States. He was very good to me. He gave us pretty much everything we asked for, but he also would go to Moscow because he knew, and he would demagogue that issue of sanctions. And so the European Union had to have unanimity on imposing economic sanctions against Russia. And they're afraid, since my prime minister was demagoguing the issue, that he wasn't going to vote for that in the European Union. And so that was an issue. I kept calling the foreign minister and saying, hey, we need solidarity here. But they were already on board. They just didn't. He wanted to be able to demagogue it publicly, but then but then in Brussels, he would support it. So all's well that ends well. But I think you're absolutely right, that we had but it's just a very scary time with the Russians. But they don't understand, diplomacy alone doesn't seem to be working. And so, we need to look at, on the other hand, Ukraine, I think it'd be very difficult if, let's say, Russia wanted to move across Ukraine. What would we do? I'm not sure, because they're not in NATO, and the American people are at a point now where they're exhausted from prosecuting wars that often have not been very successful. So we don't have a real appetite. I think it should be largely a European issue, but we should work with the Europeans on it. But I'd have a hard time arguing that you should. I agree with stepping up our support of the Ukrainian military. More we're doing now, more than we did before. But I'd have a hard time supporting the idea of sending U.S. soldiers over there. I don't know. What do you all think? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, George Washington was right about that.
What's the size of their military?
I should know that. I don't know it, but their military is quite ill-equipped. There's a lot of corruption. So, from what I read, they steal a lot of the defense money, and they don't equip their soldiers properly. It's a terrible thing, but it's also partly true about the Russians. The Russians are really much weaker than we think they are, because they don't have money for their armies either. So it's kind of, but they have a significant military that has decent capabilities. Kathy, you had a question.
Well, I don't know if it was, I heard either speak or something, I don't know if this was discussed earlier, but speaking of the poisoning, they just on the news this morning, the American correspondents interviewing Russians about the poisoning, and in Britain, they all said the West made it up, they didn't have anything to do with it, they're lying, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, these are young people, middle-aged people, and obviously they didn't interview, I don't know how many people later. But how much are there, what kind of a news, is there no freedom of press at all? Or internet?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of manipulation of social media, and when I was in Slovakia, I was dealing with this, because our embassy counted 42 anonymous websites that were disseminating, and by the way, they're extremely professional. At first I went in there saying, well, the Russians, they're going to be clumsy about this, they don't really know what they're doing. But these reporting they do is extremely clever, extremely effective. It looks like the real thing, but it's totally twisted to their propaganda. And they're doing it all from St. Petersburg or whatever. And so they send these websites. Now, what do we do in return? We have Radio Free Europe, but in Slovakia, it's a European Union country, so I didn't have that tool, because Radio Free Europe does not operate in a European Union country. And I kind of disagree with that policy. And we took a lot of things out of these countries in Eastern Europe, like the Peace Corps, under the pretext, under the reasoning for it was, well, they're part of the European Union, so the EU will take care of them. But the EU is very weak on these kind of issues, of propaganda, and because we don't, the Americans, we don't do propaganda well. It's not it doesn't come across well. It's not who we are, and so. But I think Radio Free Europe did an excellent job of being an independent news organization that covered the Ukrainian war in a very accurate way, and they were really telling it like it was. But I just wish we had it disseminated in our part of the world as well. Yes, sir.
Maybe you can clear up a shadowy spot in my understanding of history of the USSR, that when they did dismantle, and that it was essentially the leadership passing out these former republics to members of the Politburo, and so the new nation states ended up pretty much with the same old thugs that ran the whole USSR, and they've been suffering from that legacy ever since. Any truth to that?
Well, it depends on where you go. Certainly, I know that Andy has done a lot of work on Belarus, and Belarus is a strange country. It's like a throwback to the Soviet time. It's like a dictatorship, a real dictatorship, Soviet-style dictatorship. But then you go to, the Eastern Central Europe, they're doing pretty well. They've done extremely well financially, economically. If you look at Poland, this is the wrong map, but if you look at Poland had about the same GDP as Ukraine. Their GDP is now 10 times that of Ukraine because Ukraine mismanaged it so much. Ukrainians, is just so much corruption and stealing and everything. And then you go to the Central Asian countries. They're under all these dictatorships, corrupt dictatorships. So I think it depends on the area, but you're basically correct that at least the countries outside the European Union don't have good paths that they're following. I just saw a movie called The Death of Stalin, and it talks about, it's kind of a comedy, but Stalin dies, and all these Politburo guys are conniving with each other to try to kill someone else, and it reminds me of what could have gone on after the. But in the former satellite countries of Eastern Europe, there's still sentiments of people who I talked to who said, gee, we really miss the days of the Soviet Union because, we got free education. This is particularly in the high unemployment areas of, say, Eastern Slovakia, near Ukraine. So, gee, we got free education, we got free, everything's free, and now we have to struggle, we have to work at it. Like the Soviet expression was, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. But yeah, it's amazing. There's nostalgia for that period, and it's not. It's completely misguided. But they don't remember the bad things about it. And there are a lot of things they complain about with their current life, which is they're much better off. And particularly in the European Union has transferred an enormous amount of wealth to these countries, and yet places like Poland and Hungary are becoming very nationalistic. It's becoming quite dangerous over there because they're trying to remove some of the democratic pillars that are supposed to be at the core of being a member of the European Union. So they're suppressing the judiciary, freedom of the press in Poland and Hungary specifically. And in Slovakia, there was just a journalist who was assassinated. Now, that was a mafia thing, but anyways, it's a big problem. Yes, sir.
Ambassador, President Trump has decided to invite the White House. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on the merits of that decision, but I would ask you that if you were advising President Trump, what
Well, I think that there are a lot of areas. I think somebody put it well this morning. What does Putin want? He wants respect. He wants to be a player on the world stage, and he has maneuvered everything extremely cleverly to achieve that. Now, I would say there are a lot of areas that we need to work on with Russia, specifically Syria. And there was an episode about a month ago, maybe you know about it, but I didn't. I need to study it. But some Russian troops were attacked by U.S. Planes, and so we had a conflict with the Russian troops. The United States had a conflict directly with the Russian troops. So we need to figure out how to deal with these issues in Iraq and also Iran. And I don't know if Trump is going to pull out of the Iran deal, but that would be something he would need to talk to Russia about, because there's a close relationship there. And there are a lot of issues that he can talk about without getting into who shot John and what the elections and all that, which he probably is not going to want to. But I don't think it's a good idea to have the meeting to begin with. That's my own view. But I think it gives Putin too much. Putin has now successfully been isolated by the European Union and hopefully by the United States. You have John Bolton, who's the new national security advisor, and then Pompeo, who's the new Secretary of State. They're both very suspicious of Russia. But then you've got a president who's not so, who has a warm personal relationship with him. So, but hopefully Pompeo and Bolton will talk him out of having such a meeting. But I think it's very risky, because it just gives Putin a chance to divide the United States against Europe, in my opinion. Yes, sir.
May I regress just a bit? At the Soviet invasion of Georgia in 2008, a couple of web intelligence sites on the web reported that the Soviets at that time, or the Russians at that time, had the technological capability to close down the internet as they progressed into the country. And in fact, they did it in phases. They did it like a rolling thunder, where they were 10 or 15 miles ahead of the Russian troops, where the internet would shut down.
Oh.
And as they advanced, it would shut down other things. And it was obviously a huge technological accomplishment at the time. And I'm not sure the United States is even capable of that.
Right.
Are you aware of any of that?
I'm not. They use electromagnetic pulse or something to destroy. I don't know. But that's a very powerful.
I mean, they make like the internet control,
Yeah.
possibly the St. Petersburg.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So they got into the servers and everything else. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, they're very active. Of course, they were active in our elections, but they're active in elections all over Europe. The UK, everywhere. So it's a very scary, and it really dovetails with some of the comments this morning about how clever the technology is to penetrate all these democratic societies. Yes, sir. You had a question.
I've heard it said that national power depends to a great extent upon a nation's willingness to use it, whether it's military, economic, psychological, or whatever. It would seem, by what you say, that Russia is playing a pretty good game, even though they might not be as strong as we think they are militarily or economically. They're willing to use whatever power they have against the United States, against the European Union. Are we doing enough to counter Russia when they push, or are we just falling back and letting them rule the day?
Well, that's the question of the day. I mean, I think that, again, you got the new national security advisor that's really going to push back. And it really goes to the heart of this conference, which is this new kind of warfare and the gray zone warfare. It's not just military, it's cyber, it's information warfare. There's so many. The Pentagon has actually hired Hollywood producers and Hollywood screenwriters to help them imagine what warfare is going to look like in the future. And it sounds crazy, but you know, we couldn't imagine the warfare we're doing now back 100 years ago. We couldn't imagine it. But only people in Hollywood could have the imagination to think, okay, what is this going to look like? I don't think nobody knows right now, but they're getting help from Hollywood to imagine what that's going to look like and what the best strategy is for us. And now with John Bolton, you have a guy, he's not afraid to use power. But of course, Trump basically campaigned on the idea that we've been getting into a lot of bad wars. So I don't know how that's going to play out between them, but it's a very different philosophy. But I agree with the notion that you have to exert power, and that part of the solution here is to get these European countries to step up and step up their militaries, the ones that are falling short, and get them to support their own militaries more than they're doing. And but that's why I say the European Union is important, because they can act. And you're right, NATO is the military arm of that, or affiliate, you could call it. But the more they're integrated, the better they can act as a continent rather than. Would you agree with that, Joe? Yeah. Yeah. That's right, but it's so coming from, I mean, it wasn't that many years ago that General Jones told me this once, and I couldn't believe it, but he said, this is back, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, he said there's not a single American tank in Europe. I couldn't believe that, but we went through a period of withdrawing and pulling back from Europe, and we didn't have it. Now that's changed. We're now rearming and stepping up our support. But you're right, I think Putin is waking up the Europeans. And I think this poison thing has had a dramatic effect. I see I'm getting the hook. Putin has had a dramatic effect on that. So let's hope that the Europeans, the Americans get on the same page. Thank you.